He set out at dawn, with a heart turned to ashes and armor dulled of shine. In Leon remained Jimena and the children, still lost in dreams, while he began his path into exile. The northern wind bit his face, but the pain ran deeper than the cold. He was not alone, yet neither was he truly accompanied. A squire, 2 mules, and the shame of a royal decree. He passed through villages that closed their doors for fear of the king's wrath. In one they denied him water, in another bread. He was not merely a man in disgrace. He was a proscribed soul, cursed by command. And yet, as he reached the borders of Burgos, something shifted. There, in the old Castilian city where friends of his father still lived, Martín Antoinez came forth to meet him, his face firm and voice unafraid. My lord, know this, though your star may fade at court, for us it still burns like a bonfire. Behind him, others began to gather. All Barfanes, solemn as a vow, the brothers Muno and Bermudo, who had sold even their cloaks to buy horseshoes. Galindez, bringing 2 empty coffers and a dangerous kind of faith. Even the abbot from the monastery of San Pedro offered his blessing, though his hands trembled as he gave it. Do you know that sheltering you means losing goods and perhaps our eyes? Said Rodrigo. We do, Martín replied, but we also know there are punishments worse than blindness. To live without honor is one of them. And thus, they formed that wandering host, riding eastward without banner or crown, to strange lands, to uncertain futures. Not all roads led to glory. The sun barely peeked through the beech trees when Rodrigo, astride his horse, stared at the horizon, his gaze fixed on nowhere. Behind him lay Leon, Burgos, his Jimena, his children. Beside him, the few loyal men who had given up everything for him. Before him, nothingness, freedom, and affront. The reins creaked as he urged Baby Yacob forward. Something burned within him, more than dust in his eyes or thirst on the trail. It was memory. It was wrath. How did it come to this? He murmured, and his voice was swallowed by the rhythm of hooves. Then the faces returned to his mind, sharp as daggers. García Ordóñez, the perfumed fox of the court, with his twisted smile and venomous words. You cast a shadow, Rodrigo, he would say. He hated you from the first moment you won a battle, while he spun tales of fights he never fought. It was he who raised his voice in Leon, when everything hung by a thread. He who painted your oath as insult. He who whispered to the king words you never spoke. The Sierra de la Demanda rose like a natural fortress, mighty and close. Rodrigo led his company, his cloak, damp from the mist, his helmet speckled with cold droplets. Turning a bend, through the morning haze, a castle emerged, Pazuengos. Perched upon its hill like an old wound in the stone, it endured the passage of time. Rodrigo pulled the reins. He gazed at it for a long moment, silent. There, he had fought for Castile, a duel for that land. He remembered the tense silence before the charge, the steady lance, the cry of a Navarrese knight as he fell beneath his strike. García Ordóñez watching from afar, always envious. Not of the victory, but of the applause, of the name that, from that day on, began to echo in every square, El Campeador. He clenched his fists. The road to justice was long and muddied, but he still carried memory, and he still bore a sword. The castle faded behind them, a worn witness to wounds still bleeding in silence. And with the whisper of pines closing behind them, they descended toward warmer valleys. The Ebro River awaited. Before reaching Moorish lands, Rodrigo knocked on the gates of the Counts of Barcelona, but found neither table nor welcome, only silence and disdain. But among his men, there was no doubt. They followed Rodrigo Diaz not for pay, nor for glory, but because sometimes honor is a choice, even when it hurts. It was then he looked south, and in the towers of Zaragoza, a Moorish king raised an eyebrow and opened his gates, sending forth an envoy clad in green silk. "Are you Rodrigo, the exile from Castile?" the man asked in broken but clear Romance. "I am Rodrigo Diaz, and I come to offer my sword to he who dares to wield it." No more words were needed. The next day, the Cid was brought before Al-Mu'tamin, king of Zaragoza, who, after a brief exchange, saw in the Castilian not just a wandering soldier, but a living weapon, an uncomfortable ally for his enemies. A wolf he could not tame, but could unleash upon others. He offered him land, pay, and power. The Cid accepted, and thus, the former standard-bearer of Sancho became the military protector of the Taifa of Zaragoza, serving as commander of its armies, defending the city against all rivals, be they Christian or Muslim. "If Castile rejects you, come and fight for me." And Rodrigo, the exile, became Rodrigo the feared.
To my lady, Dona Jimena Diaz, flower of my days and anchor of my soul. From distant lands writes he who speaks your name each night before sleep, and each morning lifts his eyes searching for you on the horizon. The battles are harsh, but God has granted me victory. And soon, very soon, I shall be with you all again. I do not fight for gold nor out of spite, but for the name I want our children to bear with pride. Care for them. Kiss them for me. Does Alfonso still go to bed without his pouch of stories? Does Cristina and Maria still run through the gallery as she used to? Save me a place at your table and in your bed, for the day will come when I return home. Or that the memory of my honor will be worth more than my presence. Your husband, Rodrigo Diaz.
She read in silence, her lips trembling. She did not cry. She had promised herself she wouldn't. Her children, still small, were running among the garden beds, unaware of the weight of kingdoms. Jimena looked at them and thought, they still don't know that their father is more than a knight. He's a living legend. That night, sitting with them by the fire, she told them a story. Once upon a time, there was a man who had no land, but he had his word, and with his word, he forged his destiny. "Was it Papa?" asked Alfonso. "It was your father," Jimena replied, and for the first time in days, she smiled. In Zaragoza, Rodrigo did not rest. He merely changed enemies. Under the command of Al-Mu'tamin, he faced those who coveted the throne of the Ebro, Christians from the north, Moors from rival Taifas. No ally came without a price. But the Castilian did not fight for coin alone. He fought to prove that his honor was not a currency a king could trample. And each victory was a message carried across mountains and rivers. Rodrigo Diaz still lives, and he triumphs. Riding his horse, Baby Yaka, he swept across the plains like a storm. His sword, Tizona, cut through the air as if slashing fate itself. At first, they looked at him with suspicion, but with each enemy felled, with each battle won. The Muslims began to call him by a title of respect he had never heard before. El Cid. Meanwhile, to the north, the Counts of Barcelona, Ramon Berenguer II and his cousin Berenguer Ramon, cast covetous eyes on the fertile lands of the Taifa. They knew that if they could subdue Zaragoza, Their influence would stretch beyond the Segre River and farther still. The Cid, informed by his network of spies and merchants, was aware of their movements. He did not wait behind Zaragoza's walls. He rode out to meet them on open ground, like a knight still bound to his oath, even if the king who had once received it had long forgotten him. That Castilian has sold his sword to the Moors, grumbled Ramon Berenguer, seeing the Cid's banner. He is nothing more than a dog without a master. It was on the plains near Almenar that the two armies met. Dust rose before the lances fell. Swords spoke instead of heralds. Rodrigo at the front broke the enemy lines as one might crack a nut with their bare hand. His men, Alvar Fanez, Minaya, Martín Anlanez, and other loyal followers, fought not for land or plunder. They fought for something rarer, for loyalty to the honor of their lord. The counts had not expected such ferocity. Accustomed to diplomacy and feudal coercion, they had underestimated the man who rode like a thunderstorm. In the midst of battle, Rodrigo unhorsed Ramon Berenguer himself. He did not kill him. He removed his helm, looked him in the eyes, and said, "Today, you will learn there are men who cannot be bought or broken." For weeks, the counts were his prisoners. They were treated with care, given food and respect. And in time, their freedom. But they did not leave as they came. They left speaking of that exiled knight, that Castilian without a king, whom the Moors now called with reverence. CID, Lord, El Cid. Zaragoza slept beneath a copper sky when Rodrigo crossed its gates again, his armor stained, his face older than it had been 6 years before. Behind him lay the fields scorched by war, the victories over the Counts of Barcelona, and the betrayals slowly simmering, even among allies. He had served loyally, first under Al-Muqtadir, then under his son, like a man determined to hold a bridge steady over shifting waters. The Moorish kings trusted his sword, but not his Christian soul. The Christians, like King Alfonso, still looked upon him as a traitor who wielded his blade south of the Ebro. One night, Rodrigo stepped alone into the courtyard of the Alcazar. He gazed up at the starry sky, feeling that his place was neither in Zaragoza, nor in Leon, nor in any court. For some time, borders had ceased to mean anything to him. What drove him was no longer vassalage, but survival. He had men who followed him not out of duty, but out of faith. And that faith was the greatest kingdom he could ever rule. Rodrigo left behind Zaragoza's walls, his gaze fixed on the lands of the Upper Jalen. He moved with his company through forgotten fortresses and mountain passes, sleeping in dark stone castles, and at times beneath the pines and tents. No one knew exactly where the Cid lived, but everyone knew how to find him. In those wandering months, he had settled for a time in Medinaceli, a fortified bastion in no man's land, halfway between Christian and Moorish lands. From there, he launched raids towards Soria, kept watch over the Jalen passes, and received news from all corners of the realm, like a lord without a title, yet with more power than many counts. King Alfonso was still king, older now, perhaps wiser, but still surrounded by courtiers who had once whispered against Rodrigo. It was fame that reached him first, then fear, for they said Rodrigo had taken Cuarte, that no Muslim army could stop him, that warriors crossed half of Hispania just to follow his banner. But it was necessity that finally drove Alfonso to extend his hand. Castile and Leon had enemies, and the best general was not in the palace, but in the field. To the keep of Medinaceli came the king's emissary one day, tired, dusty, the seal of Leon still intact. The letter bore the signature of Alfonso VI, and it carried tempered words of cautious reconciliation. Rodrigo received it with a guarded expression. He walked to the stone balcony from where one could see the dark pine forests and the distant towers of Almazan. Only then did he break the seal. The sky over Leon was still the same, but Rodrigo looked upon it with different eyes. Behind him lay years of affront, exile, and rented loyalties to foreign taifas. The king had opened the gates of the realm again, but the wound between them still festered in silence. Alfonso received him with measured solemnity. Under the watchful gaze of his court, cold words were exchanged. Words of forced respect between men who knew they were powerful and dangerous. The reconciliation was a cold pact, tempered by necessity. Deep down, Alfonso knew the Campeador had not forgotten, but he also knew kingdoms are not sustained by pride, but by victories, and Rodrigo still had many left to conquer. The horse stepped reverently along the path leading to the small monastery where, for years, Jimena had lived with their children. There, in that refuge protected by the church's walls, she had found shelter after the Campeador's first exile. Rodrigo needed no herald. The sisters of the monastery rushed out, already aware of his return. Then, Jimena appeared in the doorway. Years had passed, more than those counted by calendars. They were years woven from uncertainty, letters that never arrived, sleepless nights, dreams interrupted by news of battles and rumors. But the moment their eyes met, all of that vanished. Rodrigo, she whispered, still not daring to move. He took a single step forward and opened his arms. Then she ran to him, as if time had folded in on itself. They embraced in silence, between stifled tears and trembling breaths. Then came the girls. Christina, the eldest, approached shyly but allowed herself to be held. Maria, more impulsive, threw herself at him as if still a child. And finally, Diego, who at first stood still, staring at that man with the grave face and burning eyes. Rodrigo knelt before him. "Are you Diego?" The boy nodded. "Then come," said the Cid, embracing him tightly. "Together, we will rebuild our home." And so it was that, after so many wars, defeats, and victories, Rodrigo finally felt whole again. He had conquered the most precious thing he had left, his family. Rodrigo, free from all bonds, had become lord of himself. Now he fought by contract and for the sustenance of his own. He had battled in the name of Alfonso, indirectly, winning ground and respect where others had retreated. Rodrigo had won nearly 10 campaigns for the Castilian king, skirmishes against Almoravid incursions, reinforcements in Castilian strongholds, intimidation of wavering taifas, and yet all of it was eclipsed by a single battle. That day, in the lands of Sagrajas, or perhaps Uckles, for the chronicles differ, Alfonso awaited the arrival of the Campeador. The king, who had gathered both Christian and Muslim troops, trusted that Rodrigo, as in other occasions, would tip the balance. But the Cid never came. The reasons were never fully clear. Some said the king's message arrived too late. Others, that Rodrigo could not reach the field in time. Whatever the truth, the battle was a disaster. Alfonso was defeated. It is said he nearly lost a leg. What is certain is that the king, furious and wounded in pride, needed someone to blame. And the name Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar hovered on everyone's lips, a shadow over the crown. And thus, without hearing or defense, came the second order of exile. Harsher, crueler, this time not a banishment from the kingdom, but from a memory of songs from the official history. But Rodrigo had his own story to write. When the second exile fell upon him like a cold stone, there was no king but his judgment, no law but necessity. And what army can march without bread or steel? What fortress can be taken without first being paid for in blood and coin? And so, the Campeador turned his eyes to the Ebro Valley. Not out of resentment alone, not for vainglory, but out of sheer realism. Legrano, Calahorra, Najera, they were not enemies, but neither were they allies. They served Count Ordóñez. And in the CID's mental map, each of those towns held the threads of the old conspiracy that had cast him from the realm. There was pillaging, burning, tribute collected. But it wasn't blind rage, it was funding. The gold of La Rioja didn't fill his coffers, it fueled a greater enterprise. With those coins, lances were bought, alliances forged, routes opened to the Levant. That loot gave Valencia the strength that neither Castile nor Leon had known how to harness. After years of campaigns and skirmishes, Rodrigo raised his eyes toward the prize he had always pursued. Valencia, prosperous and contested, was coveted by Christian kings, Muslim taifas, and ambitious lords. Its fertile lands, its port, its strategic position were unmatched. Rodrigo did not arrive as a reckless raider, but as a cunning fox. He besieged the city slowly. In a war of attrition that lasted over a year, he controlled the routes, cut off supplies, let the seasons pass to wear down the defenders' morale. Around him, an army of loyal followers, many of them veterans from Zaragoza, exiled Castilians, renegade Muslims, had become his family. He promised them spoils, honor, and land, because Valencia would not be just another plunder. It would be the principality of the Campeador. The Taifa king of Valencia, Alcadir, fell under the pressure. First, he paid tribute. Then, betrayed by his own, he died in the shadows. Rodrigo took the city in 1094 in his own name. There, in that Arab city of gardens, walls, and minarets, the Cid became a ruler. He imposed justice, tolerance, and order. He maintained his own system of tribute, made decisions as an independent prince, and governed over Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike. There in Valencia was where Rodrigo finally reunited his family. Jimena arrived with their now-grown children. There, his daughters became noble ladies, and his young son received his education. There, after years of absence, he embraced them once more. 3 years after taking Valencia, Rodrigo was still facing the threat of the Almoravids, the new masters of Islam in North Africa, who were crossing the strait to reclaim the Taifas and push back the Christian advance. King Alfonso VI, already reconciled with Rodrigo and aware of his military genius, requested his help. Castilian and Leonese forces mobilized against the Almoravids, who came in waves. Rodrigo did not go, for he now felt more lord of Valencia than vassal of Leon. Instead, his son Diego went in his place, young and brave, eager to prove his worth on the battlefield. Trusted knights accompanied him, veteran nobles, a small army forged in his father's campaigns. They fought in the Battle of Consuegra in August of that year. There they fell. The battle was disastrous for the Christian hosts. The Almoravids prevailed, and many nobles died amid the dust and steel. Diego was among them. He died without glory, without legacy, having yet to found a house or take a wife. When the news reached Valencia, Rodrigo did not scream, nor did he slash the air with his sword, but his face changed. Those around him said he began to age all at once. His hair turned white. His gaze grew deeper and more silent. He had faced kings, betrayals, and exile, but never the death of a son. The sun fell red over Valencia's towers, as if foretelling blood. Rodrigo gazed at the horizon from the battlements. He had spent years defending the city with nails, steel, and will. But now, the rumor of a great Almoravid host spread through the streets like a cold wind. Another battle, he murmured, and it will be the last. He no longer had the strength of before. His scars weighed heavier than his chainmail, but his mind remained sharp, like when he had defeated the Counts of Barcelona. The battle came like a tempest. Thousands of men crossed the Turia. The city trembled. El Cid, atop Babieca, rode once more like in his finest days. It was not the most glorious of battles, but it was the most heroic. Rodrigo, knowing his time was short, commanded each charge and movement with mastery. He allowed no retreat, admitted no fear. When victory was his, Rodrigo knew it was the last. He returned to the Alcazar staggering. He removed his helmet. His face, marked by wrinkles and sun, bore a mixture of relief and farewell. In the days that followed, illness clung to him like a silent enemy. He no longer rode out. He only listened to the sounds of the city he had made his own. "I have fulfilled my duty," he told Jimena one night with a calm voice. "I have brought honor to Castile, and I have given you a home." Jimena wept silently, not out of fear, but with the certainty that this man no longer belonged to her. He was legend. When he finally died, Valencia fell silent. His death was a devastating blow to the city. The Almoravid threat loomed close, and without El Cid, Valencia was vulnerable. But that is when the most powerful legend of the Campeador was born. They say that Jimena, his wife, and his most loyal captains, to prevent panic and embolden the enemy, devised a plan. They dressed El Cid's corpse in his armor, mounted him on his horse, and strapped him tightly to the saddle. Thus, the dead Cid rode out to his final battle, in a charge against the Almoravids who fled, believing him still alive, invincible even from the grave. This story, likely symbolic, captures the mythical power of the man. Not even death could break his presence. Jimena ruled Valencia for 2 more years, but the city was indefensible without her husband. In 1102, Alfonso VI ordered its evacuation. Jimena returned with Rodrigo's remains to Castile, and they were buried in the monastery of San Pedro de Cardena, where centuries later their tombs would be revered as symbols of medieval Spain. Through his daughters Cristina and Maria, the name Diaz de Vivar lived on, not with swords, but through marital alliances that shaped generations. The blood of El Cid ran through kings like Ferdinand the Catholic, and even the Habsburgs and Bourbons, though much diluted. Rodrigo died as he lived, with a sword in his hand, a horse beneath him, and a cause greater than himself, though his life had ended. And so ends the story, my friends, the tale of Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar. El Cid, Campeador among Moors and Christians, Lord of Valencia, a man of flesh, steel, and shadow. He gained cities, lost friends, and aged in glory. Jimena was faithful in life and sentinel in death. His daughters wove royal lineages. His son fell young, as sometimes the ripest fruit falls first in the bitter logic of war. And he died in his bed, which is no small feat for a knight. But even in death, he kept winning. May the wind carry his song. May fire consume his doubts. And may history, if there is justice in it, reserve him a corner among the great ones. And you? What are you waiting for? Give it a like and subscribe to the channel.